r/AmItheAsshole. My pastor dad's work wife bought our neighbor's house, so I exposed him. AITA for exposing my pastor dad's emotional affair in front of the entire congregation. The sold sign went up on the Morrison house on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, I watched through my bedroom window as she directed the moving truck into the driveway next door. Sister Rebecca Chin. Dad's ministry partner. The woman who'd been texting him at 11 p.m. about prayer requests and showing up to our family dinners with homemade casseroles and that sickeningly sweet smile that made my skin crawl. I'm 17, not 7. I know what I'm seeing. Honey, isn't it wonderful? Mom called from downstairs, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness she'd perfected over the past 6 months. Rebecca found a house so close to us. She said she wanted to be part of our church family neighborhood. Our neighborhood. Like she hadn't specifically hunted down the house directly across from our kitchen window where she could watch Dad leave for his morning jogs. Like it was some cosmic coincidence that the youth pastor who transferred to our church 8 months ago just happened to buy the house with a direct sightline into our backyard. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the screenshots I'd been collecting. Dad wasn't exactly careful about leaving his phone face up on the counter. Asterisk, thank you for understanding my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. Dad, 10:47 p.m. Asterisk. Asterisk, you make me feel seen, David. Truly seen. Rebecca, 10:52 p.m. Asterisk. Asterisk, Sarah's at book club tonight if you want to come over and discuss the marriage counseling curriculum. Dad, 7:23 p.m. Asterisk. Marriage counseling curriculum. Right. Because nothing says professional ministry development like candlelit discussions about the sacred bond of matrimony while your wife is out of the house. The worst part. Mom knew. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed whenever Dad's phone buzzed during dinner. The way she started wearing more makeup to church, buying new dresses, laughing a little too loud at his sermon jokes. She was fighting for her own husband and didn't even realize the battle was already lost. Dad emerged from our front door right on schedule, jogging clothes, and that stupid smile he got whenever he saw Rebecca's car in her new driveway. She appeared maybe 30 seconds later in designer workout gear that probably cost more than Mom's monthly grocery budget. What a coincidence. Dad called out, stretching against our mailbox. Ready for that run we discussed? They discussed a lot of things, apparently. Youth ministry strategies. Biblical interpretation. The loneliness of leadership that Rebecca seemed uniquely qualified to understand, despite being 12 years younger than Dad and never having led a congregation of more than 30 teenagers. I watched them jog away together, matching pace perfectly, and something crystallized in my chest. This wasn't just going to stop. Rebecca buying the house next door wasn't coincidence or even innocent infatuation anymore, this was a declaration. She was planting her flag in our territory, and Dad was letting her. Mom appeared beside me at the window, coffee mug trembling slightly in her hands. They make good running partners, she said quietly. Mom. Your father works so hard for the church. It's nice that he has someone who shares his passion for ministry. The defeat in her voice made my decision for me. Sunday was 3 days away. Dad was scheduled to give a sermon about faithfulness and commitment in Christian relationships. I opened my laptop and started typing my PowerPoint presentation. If Dad wanted to preach about faithfulness, I'd make sure the congregation got the full lesson. The next morning, I found Rebecca in our kitchen. Not knocking on our door like a normal neighbor. Not invited over for coffee like a family friend. Just there, pulling ingredients out of our refrigerator like she'd been given a key and permanent access to our lives. Oh. Good morning, sweetheart, she chirped, turning around with Mom's good mixing bowl in her hands. I'm making pancakes for everyone. I noticed your mom seemed tired at prayer group last night, so I thought I'd help out. Mom sat at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, dark circles under her eyes, watching Rebecca use our stove with the same shell-shocked expression of someone witnessing a slow-motion car accident. That's very thoughtful, Mom managed. Where's Dad? I asked, grabbing orange juice from the fridge Rebecca had been rummaging through. He's showering, Rebecca said, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. We had such an intense planning session last night about the youth retreat. We were up until almost midnight discussing sleeping arrangements and supervision protocols. The way she said, sleeping arrangements, while standing in our kitchen in yoga pants and one of those fitted tank tops that probably violated our church's modesty guidelines made my stomach turn. Dad appeared in the doorway, hair still damp, wearing the cologne he usually saved for Sunday services. Rebecca, you didn't have to. I wanted to, she interrupted, their eyes meeting across the kitchen island with the kind of loaded look that belonged in movies, not in front of someone's wife and daughter. It's what family does for each other. Family, the word hung in the air like smoke. Mom excused herself to get dressed, and the second she was out of earshot, Dad moved closer to Rebecca. Not touching, but close enough that I could see the intimate way they shared space, like they'd rehearsed this dance before. You need to be careful, Dad murmured. Sarah's been asking questions. About what? Rebecca's voice dropped to match his. We're not doing anything wrong, David. Unless you want to be. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds too long. I cleared my throat loudly. So Rebecca, how long have you been house hunting in our neighborhood? Her smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind her eyes. Oh, I wasn't specifically looking here. But when I heard the Morrison place was available, it felt like a sign. Sometimes God puts us exactly where we need to be. Convenient, I said. Isn't it? She turned back to the pancakes, but I caught the satisfied smile she thought she was hiding. After breakfast, I watched from my bedroom window as Rebecca and Dad stood in her driveway, heads bent over what looked like church documents spread across the hood of her car. Their conversation was animated, punctuated by Dad's gestures and Rebecca's laughter carrying across the space between our houses. Mom was in her garden, aggressively weeding the flower beds that bordered our shared property line. Every few minutes, she'd glance over at them, then attack the weeds with renewed vigor. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Jessica, asterisk, youth group tonight. Rebecca's doing some special presentation about authentic relationships or something. Asterisk. Perfect. Rebecca was going to lecture a bunch of teenagers about authenticity while systematically dismantling my parents' marriage. I opened my laptop and added another slide to my presentation. This one was titled, "What does the Bible say about coveting your neighbor's husband?" 2 more days until Sunday's service. I was going to need more screenshots. That evening, I sat in the back row of youth group, watching Rebecca command the room with the same magnetic energy that had apparently captivated my father. She changed into a modest cardigan and knee-length skirt, the picture of pastoral propriety, but I noticed how she kept checking her phone every few minutes. "Tonight we're talking about authentic relationships," she announced, clicking to her first slide. "How do we know when someone truly sees us for who we are?" The irony was suffocating. "Sometimes," Rebecca continued, pacing in front of the cross hanging behind the makeshift podium, "we find deep connections in unexpected places. With people who understand our calling, our purpose, our hearts." Jessica leaned over and whispered, "She's really good at this stuff." I wanted to tell Jessica exactly what Rebecca was good at, but my phone buzzed with a text from Mom, asterisk, "Can you pick up milk on your way home? Your father is having another late meeting with Rebecca about the budget." Asterisk. Another late meeting. On a Thursday night. When the church office had been locked since 5 p.m. I excused myself and drove to the grocery store, but instead of going inside, I parked across the street from the church. Dad's car was in the parking lot next to Rebecca's sedan. Every window in the building was dark except for the soft glow coming from Dad's office on the second floor. My hands shook as I opened my camera app and zoomed in. Through the office window, I could see 2 silhouettes sitting close together on the couch Dad used for counseling sessions. Too close for a budget meeting. Too intimate for ministry partners. I took photos until my phone storage warned me it was full. When I got home an hour later, Mom was in her pajamas, grading papers at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea beside her elbow. "Did you get the milk?" she asked without looking up. "They were out," I lied, sitting down across from her. "Mom, can I ask you something?" She finally looked up, and in the harsh kitchen lighting, she looked older than her 42 years. "What's on your mind, honey? Are you and Dad okay?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. Mom's pen stopped moving across the paper. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Rebecca's in our kitchen making breakfast. Because Dad's working late every night. Because you look like you haven't slept in weeks." Mom set down her pen and folded her hands. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Marriage goes through seasons, sweetheart. Your father is under a lot of pressure at church. The board is demanding more youth engagement, and Rebecca brings fresh ideas. Mom, she bought the house next door. To be part of our church community. She's in love with Dad." The words escaped before I could stop them. Mom's face went completely white. "That's a very serious accusation," she whispered. "And Dad's in love with her too." Mom stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor. "I think you should go to bed. You have school tomorrow." "Mom. Go to bed, please." I heard Dad's car in the driveway 20 minutes later, followed by the low murmur of my parents' voices downstairs. Then Mom's footsteps on the stairs, the guest bedroom door closing, and the sound of muffled crying through the wall. Dad slept alone that night. Friday morning, Rebecca was back in our kitchen, this time with fresh flowers from her new garden and homemade muffins. Mom stayed upstairs, claiming a headache. I added 3 more slides to my presentation and practiced my speech in the mirror. 1 more day. Saturday arrived with the kind of suffocating tension that makes the air feel thick before a thunderstorm. I woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs, the first time I'd heard my parents actually fighting instead of navigating around each other with polite, careful words. "I'm not imagining this, David." Mom's voice carried up through the heating vents. "She's always here. In my kitchen, in my garden, at every church function hanging on your every word. Sarah, you're being paranoid. Rebecca is a dedicated member of our ministry team." "Ministry team?" "She bought the house next door, David. Normal colleagues don't uproot their entire lives to live 20 feet from their coworkers." A long pause. Then Dad's voice, quieter but somehow more devastating, "Maybe if you showed half the interest in my work that Rebecca does. Don't you dare turn this around on me." I pressed my ear to the floor, my stomach churning. This was it. The conversation they'd been avoiding for months was finally happening, and it was going exactly as badly as I'd feared. "She gets what I'm trying to accomplish here," Dad continued. "The vision for youth ministry, the challenges of leadership. When was the last time you asked about my sermon preparation? When did you last want to discuss anything deeper than grocery lists and parent-teacher conferences? I'm your wife, not your ministry groupie. I'm trying to hold this family together while you play spiritual advisor with your 29-year-old work wife." The front door slammed. Through my window, I watched Dad storm across the yard toward Rebecca's house. She appeared on her front porch before he'd even knocked, like she'd been waiting. Watching. They disappeared inside together. I found Mom in the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, staring at the coffee maker like she'd forgotten how to use it. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "Rough morning?" I asked gently. She let out a bitter laugh. "Your father thinks I'm being paranoid and unsupportive. Apparently, I'm the problem here." "Mom, you're not." "Am I, though?" She turned to face me, and the raw doubt in her expression broke my heart. "Maybe I have gotten too wrapped up in the mundane stuff. Teaching, bills, making sure you have clean clothes and regular meals. Maybe I forgot how to be the kind of woman who inspires deep theological discussions at midnight. That's not your job. You're already doing everything. Apparently not the right things." Through the kitchen window, I could see movement in Rebecca's living room. 2 figures on her couch, sitting close enough that they could have been sharing the same breath. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, asterisk, "Emergency youth group meeting tonight." Rebecca called it. "Says there's been some concerning gossip going around about leadership. You coming?" Asterisk. My blood turned to ice water. Rebecca knew. Somehow, she'd figured out that people were starting to notice, starting to talk. She was getting ahead of the story, controlling the narrative before anyone could challenge her version of events. I looked at my mom, still staring out the window at her husband seeking comfort in another woman's house, and made my final decision. Mom, I need to tell you something, I said, opening my laptop. And you're probably going to want to sit down. I showed her everything. The screenshots, the photos, the timeline of late-night meetings and convenient coincidences. Mom's face went through a dozen emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally, a kind of grim resignation. How long have you known? She whispered. Months. I kept hoping it would stop, that Dad would come to his senses. But now she's called this meeting. She's going to spin it, Mom. Make you look jealous and paranoid. Make everyone think you're the unstable one. Mom stared at the screen showing her husband's text messages with another woman, her 20-year marriage reduced to digital evidence of betrayal. What do you think I should do? I closed the laptop and met her eyes. Let me handle it. Tomorrow was Sunday. Time for church. That night, Rebecca's emergency youth group meeting was packed. Word had spread through the church's teenage network faster than wildfire, and even kids who normally skipped were crammed into the fellowship hall, sensing drama in the air. I sat in my usual back row spot, laptop bag at my feet, watching Rebecca work the room. She dressed carefully, professional but approachable, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older, more authoritative. The youth pastor ready to address a crisis. I know there have been some whispers lately, she began, her voice carrying that perfect blend of concern and disappointment. Ugly rumors about your church leadership that are frankly heartbreaking to address. Jessica leaned over to me. What rumors? I haven't heard anything. But I had. Because I've been listening in the right places. Mrs. Patterson mentioning to Mrs. Kim how often she saw Rebecca's car at our house. Deacon Williams asking Dad after last Sunday's service if everything was stable at home, given how much extra support Rebecca seemed to be providing our family. Small-town church gossip moved like water finding cracks in concrete. Sometimes, Rebecca continued, when people see dedication to ministry, they misinterpret it as something inappropriate. But I want you all to understand something important about authentic Christian community. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of her and Dad at the church picnic, heads bent over what appeared to be event planning documents. Innocent enough in isolation. Pastor David has been an incredible mentor to me during my transition to this community. He and Sister Sarah have welcomed me with such grace. Her voice caught slightly on Mom's name. But there are those who would rather tear down godly relationships than celebrate how the body of Christ supports its members. My stomach clenched. She was good. Really good. Preemptively striking against accusations that hadn't even been made public yet, positioning herself as the victim of gossip and Dad as the righteous mentor being unfairly maligned. Some of you might have heard that I recently purchased a home in Pastor David's neighborhood. I want to address that directly. Rebecca's eyes swept the room, landing on me for just a second too long. When I learned there was a house available in a community so rich with Christian families, it felt like God opening a door. But apparently, some people think it's inappropriate for single church members to live near married leadership. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She was framing it perfectly, making anyone who questioned her motives look petty and suspicious. I want to read you something, Rebecca said, pulling out her phone. This is a text I received today from someone in this congregation. My heart stopped. Your relationship with Pastor David is inappropriate and everyone can see it. You need to step back before you destroy his family. Rebecca's voice was steady, but she let a slight tremor creep in. This anonymous message was sent to me at 2 p.m. today. Can you imagine receiving something like this? The room erupted in sympathetic murmurs and angry whispers. Someone actually gasped. Rebecca had just painted herself as the victim of a harassment campaign. But I knew that text hadn't come from me. I'd been in AP chemistry at 2 p.m., my phone locked in my locker per school policy. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. Rebecca had sent that message to herself. Created her own evidence of persecution to get ahead of any real accusations. She wasn't just manipulating my father, she was manipulating the entire congregation. I want you all to pray for whoever sent this, Rebecca continued, her voice now thick with practiced forgiveness. They're clearly hurting, clearly struggling with something that's causing them to lash out at godly relationships. I pulled out my phone and quietly opened my presentation file. Tomorrow's sermon was going to be very different from what Rebecca was expecting. But as I looked around the room at the sympathetic faces, at the teenagers already rallying to Rebecca's defense, I realized she'd just made my job infinitely harder. She wasn't just stealing my father anymore. She was stealing the entire congregation's trust. And she was very, very good at it. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes everything feel ominous. I woke at 5 a.m. with my stomach in knots, my PowerPoint presentation saved on a flash drive in my pocket and backup copies emailed to 3 different accounts. Mom was already in the kitchen, dressed in her best navy blue dress, the one she'd worn to her wedding anniversary dinner last year when she still believed she was celebrating 20 years of faithful marriage. Her makeup was flawless, but I could see the concealer working overtime under her eyes. You look beautiful, I told her, meaning it. She managed a weak smile. Your father's already at the church. Had to prepare for his sermon about faithfulness in marriage. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Mom, you know what's going to happen today, right? She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee. I keep thinking there has to be another way. Some path that doesn't blow up our entire life. She already blew it up. She just did it quietly. Through the kitchen window, I could see Rebecca's house. Her car was gone, probably already at church, helping Dad with last-minute preparations. Playing the devoted ministry partner right up until the moment I exposed her. What if nobody believes you? Mom asked quietly. After last night, after her performance with the youth group, what if they think you're just a troubled teenager acting out? The question had kept me awake most of the night. Rebecca was smart, calculating, and she'd spent months building her reputation as the sweet, dedicated youth pastor. Meanwhile, I was 17 with a history of challenging authority figures and asking uncomfortable questions in Sunday school. Then at least we'll know we tried, I said, but doubt was creeping in around the edges of my confidence. We drove to church in tense silence. The parking lot was more packed than usual, apparently word of last night's youth group drama had spread through the congregation's phone tree. Perfect. The bigger the audience, the more impact my revelation would have. But as we walked through the front doors, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Deacon Williams stood near the sanctuary entrance with two other board members, their expressions grave. When they saw Mom, their conversation stopped abruptly. Sarah, Deacon Williams approached us with careful steps. Could we have a word before service begins? Mom's face paled. Of course. They led us to a small conference room off the main hallway, and my worst fears were confirmed the moment we sat down. We received some concerning information yesterday evening, Deacon Williams began, his weathered hands folded on the table. About accusations being made against Pastor David and Sister Rebecca. Mom's voice came out steady despite her obvious panic. What kind of accusations? Anonymous messages. Phone calls. Someone's been spreading rumors about an inappropriate relationship. He looked directly at me. Rebecca mentioned there might be some family tensions contributing to these stories. My mouth went dry. She hadn't just gotten ahead of my expose, she'd weaponized it. Turned my evidence into proof of my own instability. Rebecca suggested, continued board member Harrison, that perhaps some individual counseling might help address whatever's causing these outbursts. For the good of the church family. They weren't going to let me speak. Rebecca had poisoned the well so thoroughly that anything I said would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed teenager. She turned my own congregation against me before I'd even had a chance to present my case. Where is this information coming from? Mom asked carefully. That's confidential. But we wanted to give your family a chance to address this privately before it becomes a larger issue. The message was clear: shut up, get counseling, and let the adults handle adult business. I felt the flash drive in my pocket like a lead weight. All that evidence, all those screenshots, completely worthless now that Rebecca had reframed the narrative. But then something shifted in Mom's expression. A hardness I'd never seen before. Gentlemen, she said, standing up slowly. I think it's time we all heard what my daughter has to say. The sanctuary was fuller than Christmas morning. Word had clearly spread through the congregation's gossip network that something was about to go down, and nobody wanted to miss it. I sat in the third row between Mom and my stomach full of lead, watching Dad pace behind the pulpit with nervous energy while Rebecca sat primly in the front row, hands folded like she was posing for a church directory photo. Before Pastor David begins today's message, Deacon Williams announced from the podium, we have some family sharing. This wasn't the plan. My carefully rehearsed moment of walking up during Dad's sermon, my dramatic PowerPoint presentation, none of it was going to happen the way I'd imagined. Instead, I was being paraded up there like a problem child about to apologize for breaking a window. But Mom's hand squeezed my shoulder. Tell them, she whispered. Tell them everything. I stood up on shaking legs and walked to the front of the sanctuary. 300 pairs of eyes followed my movement, and I could hear the whispers starting already. Rebecca's face remained perfectly serene, but I caught the flash of triumph in her eyes. She thought she'd already won. Hi everyone, I started, my voice cracking slightly. I know Deacon Williams said this was family sharing, but what I need to share affects all of us. I pulled out my phone, ignoring the disapproving murmurs about technology in the sanctuary. 6 months ago, Sister Rebecca joined our church family. She's been wonderful with the youth group, and everyone loves her enthusiasm for ministry. Rebecca's smile widened. She thought I was about to deliver some teenage apology for spreading rumors. But I've been watching something develop that I think you all need to know about. I swiped to the first screenshot. These are text messages between Sister Rebecca and my father. From his phone. The sanctuary went dead silent. Thank you for understanding my heart in ways I didn't know were possible, I read aloud. You make me feel seen, David. Truly seen. Sent at 10:52 p.m. on a Tuesday. Dad's face had gone completely white. Rebecca was still smiling, but it looked painted on now. 3 weeks ago, Sister Rebecca bought the house next door to ours. Not anywhere in town, specifically next door. She told everyone it was to be closer to the church family. I looked directly at her. But that same day, she texted my father, now we can have our morning discussions without anyone wondering why I'm always at your office. The murmurs were getting louder. Mrs. Patterson was clutching her purse like it was a life preserver. Last Thursday night, they had a budget meeting that lasted until after 11 p.m. Except the church office was locked at 5, and I have photos of them in Dad's office with all the lights off except for candles. That's enough, Dad's voice boomed from behind the pulpit, but it came out desperate instead of authoritative. No, it's not enough. I turned to face the congregation fully. Because yesterday, Sister Rebecca called an emergency youth group meeting to get ahead of gossip about church leadership. She showed us an anonymous text she claimed to receive, calling her relationship with Dad inappropriate. Rebecca's smile finally cracked. But I know she sent that text to herself, because she needed to play victim before anyone could present real evidence. I held up my phone. Evidence like the 47 text messages between them in the past week. Like photos of them holding hands in her backyard. Like Dad telling her, Sarah's book club runs late on Thursdays if you want to come over. The sanctuary erupted. Voices rising, people standing, someone actually gasping loud enough to echo off the walls. But Rebecca stood up too, tears already streaming down her face. This poor child, she said, her voice breaking beautifully. She's been struggling so much with her parents' marriage problems that she's created this elaborate fantasy to explain their difficulties. And just like that, she was fighting back. Pastor David and Sister Sarah have been working through some challenges, Rebecca continued, her voice carrying perfectly to every corner of the sanctuary. And I've been trying to provide pastoral support to their family. But this sweet girl has misinterpreted adult conversations and counseling sessions. The congregation was split now. Half were staring at me with growing suspicion, while the other half looked between Rebecca and Dad with confusion. Rebecca had years of manipulation practice, I had raw evidence and teenage desperation. Show them the photos, Mom's voice cut through the chaos from her pew. All heads turned to stare at her. Mom stood up slowly, her navy dress pristine, her voice steady. Show them the photo from Tuesday night. My hands shook as I swiped to the image I'd taken from my bedroom window. Rebecca and Dad in her backyard, his hand on her face, her arms around his waist, both of them silhouetted against her kitchen light at 9:47 p.m. That's doctored, Rebecca said immediately, but her voice was higher now. Anyone can manipulate digital images. Then explain this. Mom's voice carried an authority I'd never heard before. She walked up the aisle, pulling out her own phone. David's location tracking. Tuesday at 9:47 p.m., he was logged at Rebecca's address. He told me he was at the hospital visiting Mrs. Coleman. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mrs. Coleman called out from the back row, I wasn't in a hospital Tuesday. I was at my grandson's baseball game. The sanctuary exploded again, but this time the energy was different. Angrier. More focused. Furthermore, Mom continued, and I could see 20 years of suppressed frustration finally finding its voice. Rebecca has been in my kitchen 4 times this week without invitation. She has a key to my house that my husband gave her 4 emergency pastoral visits. She's scheduled 3 church events at venues that require her and David to travel together overnight. Deacon Williams looked like he was going to be sick. Pastor David, is this true? Dad gripped the pulpit so hard his knuckles went white. The relationship has been pastoral in nature. Rebecca needed guidance adjusting to our community. Cut the crap, David. The profanity from Mom's mouth in the middle of church caused audible gasps. Tell them about the marriage counseling sessions you've been having. With her. While you're married to me. We were developing curriculum. You were having private sessions where you discussed your feelings for each other. Mom's voice cracked. I read the notes, David. I found them in your briefcase. 3 weeks of sessions about emotional intimacy and spiritual connections and exploring attraction within Christian boundaries. Rebecca's face had gone completely pale. The congregation was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Sarah, please, Dad's voice was pleading now. You're misunderstanding. I'm understanding perfectly. Mom turned to face the congregation. My husband has been having an emotional affair with his coworker, who systematically inserted herself into our family, our home, and our marriage. And when their feelings got too obvious to hide, she bought the house next door so they could continue their ministry partnership more conveniently. Mrs. Patterson stood up from her pew. I saw them at Morrison's Cafe last week. Holding hands across the table. I thought Sarah knew. Another voice, she was asking me about David's favorite foods at the church potluck. Another, they carpooled to the district meeting without telling anyone else there was room in the car. The evidence was cascading now, congregation members adding their own observations to the pile. Rebecca looked trapped, her tears seeming less sympathetic and more desperate. But then she played her final card. I'm pregnant, she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The sanctuary went dead silent. She placed a protective hand over her stomach and looked directly at Dad. We were going to tell everyone after we figured out how to handle this properly. Dad's face went completely gray. And that's when I realized Rebecca had just revealed the one piece of evidence I didn't have. The silence in the sanctuary was deafening. 300 people holding their breath, waiting to see if my father would confirm or deny that he'd gotten his ministry partner pregnant. Dad's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. Rebecca, we discussed. We discussed a lot of things, David. Her voice was stronger now, more confident. She dropped her final bomb and she knew it. But this baby is real, and it deserves a father who won't abandon it for the sake of appearances. Mom made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a sob. I watched 20 years of marriage crumble in real time across her face. But something felt wrong. Rebecca's timing was too perfect, her revelation too convenient. She'd pulled the pregnancy card at the exact moment when the congregation was turning against her, when the evidence was becoming overwhelming. When did you find out? I asked, my voice carrying across the deadly quiet sanctuary. Rebecca's hand moved protectively over her stomach. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I repeated, pulling out my phone again. That's interesting, because 3 weeks ago you posted Instagram photos from the church bowling league where you were drinking beer. Multiple photos, multiple beers. I held up the screen, swiping through the images. And last weekend at the youth group pizza party, Jessica's mom brought wine coolers for the adult volunteers. You had 3. Rebecca's face flushed. I didn't know yet. You also signed up to chaperone the whitewater rafting trip next month, added Mrs. Patterson from her pew, her teacher voice cutting through the tension. When I asked if you had any health restrictions, you said no. People don't always know immediately, Rebecca started, but her voice was getting higher, more strained. Show them the test, I said simply. What? The pregnancy test. If you found out 2 weeks ago, show them the test. Rebecca's eyes darted around the sanctuary like a trapped animal. I don't carry it with me. But you keep it, right? Biggest news of your life, proof of your relationship with Dad, evidence that would change everything. I stepped closer. Unless you're lying. I don't have to prove anything to a child. Yes, you do. Mom's voice was ice cold. Because I've been married to David for 20 years, and I know his face when he's hearing something for the first time. All eyes turned to Dad, who looked like he was about to faint. Rebecca, you told me you were late, but you never said. You knew she might be pregnant. Mom's voice cracked like a whip. She mentioned, we were concerned, but no test, no confirmation. Dad was stumbling over his words, making it worse with every syllable. So you've been having unprotected sex with her. Mom's statement hung in the air like a death sentence. The congregation erupted again, but this time the energy was different. Uglier. These weren't just whispers about inappropriate relationships anymore, this was adultery, potential illegitimate children, their beloved pastor revealed as a hypocrite and a liar. Enough. Deacon Williams's voice boomed over the chaos. This is a house of worship, not a courthouse. But the damage was done. Rebecca's pregnancy claim had backfired spectacularly, and now instead of being the victim of a teenager's accusations, she was a woman claiming to be carrying the pastor's child while admitting she had no proof. Emergency board meeting, Deacon Williams announced. Now. Everyone else, please exit the sanctuary in an orderly fashion. As people began filing out in stunned silence, Rebecca grabbed Dad's arm. David, tell them. Tell them what we talked about. The future we planned. Dad pulled away from her like she was on fire. We never discussed you being pregnant. And that's when I saw it, the moment Rebecca realized she'd overplayed her hand. The fake tears stopped, replaced by something cold and calculating. Fine, she said, her voice dropping to its normal register. But I know what I saw in those marriage counseling sessions, David. I know what you wrote about your feelings for me. And I know what happens to pastors who abandon pregnant women, whether the baby exists or not. She was threatening him. In front of the entire board, in God's house, she was threatening to destroy him either way. Mom looked at Dad with an expression I'd never seen before, not hurt, not anger, but complete disgust. 20 years, she whispered. 20 years, and this is who you really are. The board meeting lasted 45 minutes. I sat in the hallway outside the conference room with Mom, listening to muffled voices rising and falling like angry ocean waves. Rebecca had stormed out after 20 minutes, her heels clicking against the linoleum in sharp, furious staccato beats. When the door finally opened, Dad emerged looking like he'd aged 10 years. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped, and he couldn't meet our eyes. David, Deacon Williams's voice was formal, cold. You have 72 hours to submit your resignation letter. We'll announce your departure as a family medical leave, but your employment with this church is terminated effective immediately. Dad nodded mutely. The parsonage lease is also terminated. You have 30 days to find alternative housing. Mom's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the hallway. We were losing everything, Dad's job, our house, our entire community. The weight of what I'd set in motion crashed over me like a tidal wave. What about Rebecca? I asked, my voice smaller than I'd intended. Sister Rebecca's contract will not be renewed when it expires next month, Deacon Williams said carefully. The board feels it's best for all parties if she seeks ministry opportunities elsewhere. So she got a month to find a new job while Dad got 72 hours to write his resignation. Even in disgrace, Rebecca was being handled with kid gloves. The drive home was silent except for Mom's occasional sniffling. Dad followed us in his own car, probably calling Rebecca to coordinate their next moves. The thought made my stomach turn. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed Rebecca's car wasn't in her driveway next door. Her front door stood wide open, and I could see boxes scattered across her lawn. She's leaving, Mom observed, her voice flat. We sat in our car watching movers load Rebecca's furniture into a truck. She appeared in her doorway wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her perfect church persona completely abandoned. When she saw our car, she walked directly over and knocked on Mom's window. Mom rolled it down slowly. Sarah, I want you to know I never meant for it to go this far, Rebecca said, and for the first time, her voice sounded genuinely remorseful. I thought if David could see how much better we worked together, how much more I understood his calling. You bought the house next door, Mom replied coldly. You inserted yourself into my kitchen, my marriage, my life. You manipulated my daughter's youth group to make yourself look like a victim. What exactly didn't you mean to do? Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. I fell in love. I've never felt a connection like that before, and I thought. You thought you'd steal my husband by playing the devoted church worker. Mom's voice was getting stronger, more controlled. And when that wasn't working fast enough, you lied about being pregnant to force his hand. I wasn't lying about the pregnancy, Rebecca said quietly. I was lying about the timing. I found out this morning. The words hit like a physical blow. Mom went completely white. This morning. I whispered. Rebecca nodded, tears finally looking genuine. I took the test before church. I was going to tell David privately after service, but then, everything exploded. So she really was pregnant. With my father's child. The fake revelation had become accidentally real, and now everyone involved was trapped in an even more complicated nightmare. Dad's car door slammed, and he walked over to our cluster. Rebecca, we need to talk. No, Mom said firmly, getting out of the car. We all need to talk. Inside. Now. She walked toward our front door without looking back, leaving the three of us to follow like guilty children about to face judgment. This conversation was going to determine whether our family had any chance of surviving what I'd unleashed. The conversation that followed in our living room was the most surreal hour of my life. Mom sat in her usual chair by the window, still wearing her navy church dress but looking like she was presiding over a funeral. Dad perched on the edge of the couch like he might need to run at any moment. Rebecca stood by the fireplace, one hand on her stomach, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. How far along? Mom asked, her voice eerily calm. The test just shows positive. Maybe 6 weeks. Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. Dad buried his face in his hands. This isn't how this was supposed to happen. How was it supposed to happen, David? Mom's composure was terrifying. Were you planning to divorce me quietly? Move in next door. Pretend this was all some beautiful love story instead of adultery. We never meant, Rebecca started. Stop. Mom held up one hand. Just stop with the, we never meant, nonsense. You meant every single thing. You researched our family, found out about our marriage troubles, and systematically positioned yourself to replace me. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca's face flushed, but she didn't deny it. You want to know something interesting? Mom continued, pulling out her phone. I did some research of my own this week. Called your previous church in Portland. Turns out you left under very similar circumstances. Pastor Williams there is also divorced now. My blood turned to ice. Rebecca had done this before. That was completely different. Rebecca's voice was getting defensive. Different how? Different because this time you actually succeeded in getting pregnant. Dad finally looked up. Sarah, please. We need to figure out how to move forward. We. Mom's laugh was bitter. There is no we anymore, David. You made your choice when you started marriage counseling sessions with your girlfriend. I sat in the corner feeling like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. This was what I'd wanted, the truth exposed, Rebecca's manipulation revealed. But seeing my parents' marriage die in real time was more devastating than I'd imagined. What about the baby? Rebecca asked quietly. Whatever happened between us, this child deserves stability. That child, Mom said with ice in her voice, is not my responsibility. You wanted my husband, you got him. Congratulations on winning the prize. Dad winced. Sarah, I know I've made mistakes. Mistakes? Mom stood up abruptly. A mistake is forgetting to pay the electric bill. This is betrayal. This is 20 years of marriage thrown away for some fantasy with a woman who's clearly done this before. Through the window, I could see neighbors gathering on their porches, pretending to water plants or check mail while obviously watching our house. The morning's church drama was already spreading through the community like wildfire. People are staring, I said quietly. Mom glanced outside and her expression hardened further. Let them stare. By tomorrow, everyone in town will know Pastor David got his ministry partner pregnant and abandoned his family. I'm not abandoning anyone, Dad protested weakly. Really? Because you just lost your job, we're losing our house, and you're about to be a father again at 45 with a woman who manipulates churches for sport. Mom's voice was getting sharper. Sounds like abandonment to me. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face went pale. The district supervisor wants to meet with me tomorrow morning. Someone already called the denominational office. The full scope of the disaster was becoming clear. This wasn't just affecting our family anymore, it was going to ripple through the entire church hierarchy. The denominational meeting turned into a complete disaster. By Monday afternoon, Mom had received 3 phone calls from church officials, 2 from local reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the pastor scandal, and 1 from Dad's seminary professor asking if the rumors about his moral failure were true. I sat at the kitchen table doing homework while Mom fielded the calls with increasing frustration, watching Rebecca's house through the window. The moving truck was gone, but her car was still there, and I could see lights on inside. She hadn't left town yet. No comment, Mom said for the 4th time into the phone. This is a private family matter. She hung up and immediately started ringing again. Mom, maybe we should unplug it, I suggested. Maybe we should have thought about that before you decided to air our dirty laundry in front of 300 people, she snapped, then immediately looked stricken. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. But she wasn't wrong. I'd opened this can of worms, and now it was consuming everything. The local newspaper had already called twice asking for interviews about the embattled pastor and his congregation. Apparently our small-town drama was juicy enough to make regional news. Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway looking haggard. He'd been staying in the guest room since Sunday, emerging only for awkward conversations about logistics and damage control. The district meeting didn't go well, he announced unnecessarily. They're launching a formal investigation into the entire youth ministry program. Every overnight trip, every private counseling session, every budget expenditure from the past year. Mom looked up from the ringing phone. What does that mean? It means they think Rebecca and I might have been involved longer than we admitted. Dad's voice was hollow. They're treating this like a systematic abuse of power case now. My stomach dropped. But it wasn't that long, right? Just the past few months. The silence that followed was deafening. David? Mom's voice was dangerously quiet. She started emailing me about ministry philosophy last summer. Before she even interviewed for the position. Dad's words came out in a rush. I thought she was just enthusiastic about joining our team. Last summer. Mom stood up slowly. She was cultivating you before she even got hired. It wasn't like that initially. She researched you, contacted you privately, and then applied for a job at your church. Mom's voice was getting higher. This was premeditated, David. She hunted you down specifically. The phone rang again. This time Mom snatched it up with violent force. What? She barked into the receiver. Her face went completely white as she listened. When? How much? Are you absolutely certain? She hung up and stared at us with an expression I couldn't read. That was our bank, she said slowly. Someone's been making unauthorized withdrawals from our savings account. Small amounts, spread over several months. About $3,000 total. Dad's face went gray. Sarah, I can explain. You gave her money. Our money. She was having financial difficulties adjusting to the move. It was temporary. She was having financial difficulties because she quit her last job to come here and seduce you. Mom's composure finally cracked completely. She used our money to buy the house next door. I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. This wasn't just an affair anymore, it was fraud. Rebecca hadn't just stolen my father, she'd literally stolen our money to finance her manipulation campaign. The phone rang again, and this time all 3 of us stared at it like it was a bomb. Answer it, Mom said grimly. Let's see what fresh hell we're dealing with now. Dad picked up with shaking hands. Hello. Yes, this is Pastor David. What? That's impossible. When did she? He hung up and looked at us with pure panic in his eyes. Rebecca's gone. She cleaned out her bank accounts and disappeared. Her landlord found a note saying she was moving back to Portland for family reasons. The woman pregnant with my father's child had just vanished into thin air. The phone rang 6 more times in the next hour. Each call brought worse news. Rebecca's former landlord, she'd broken her lease and left no forwarding address. The church treasurer, she'd submitted expense reports for youth ministry supplies that were never delivered, another $800 unaccounted for. Mrs. Patterson from the fellowship committee, Rebecca had collected money for a special Mother's Day service that never happened. She's been running a con, Mom said flatly, staring at the growing list of Rebecca's deceptions spread across our kitchen table. This whole thing was a scam from the beginning. Dad sat slumped in his chair like a broken marionette. The baby. What baby, David? You think someone who's been stealing from our church and lying about everything else is telling the truth about being pregnant? Mom's voice was acidic. She played her final card to buy time to escape. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, asterisk, did you see Rebecca's social media? Posted from Seattle airport 2 hours ago. Says she's moving home to care for sick grandmother. Asterisk. I showed the message to my parents. Mom let out a bitter laugh. Sick grandmother. Of course. Can't be abandoning her pastoral duties for selfish reasons, has to be family obligation. She stood up and started pacing. Do you understand what she's done? She's made you look like the predatory pastor who drove away an innocent young woman. She gets to play victim while we deal with the investigation and the scandal. The full scope of Rebecca's manipulation was becoming crystal clear. She'd positioned every single element to ensure that if things went sideways, she'd emerge as the wronged party while Dad took all the blame. We have to tell people the truth, I said. About the money, the lies, the fake pregnancy. With what proof? Dad's voice was hollow. She's gone. The bank records show I authorized those transfers. Her pregnancy claim was never verified because she disappeared before anyone could ask for documentation. Mom stopped pacing and turned to stare at him. You authorized transfers to your girlfriend using our joint account. She said she needed help with moving expenses. Our anniversary money, David. The vacation fund we've been building for 10 years. Mom's voice cracked. You gave our anniversary savings to your mistress so she could buy a house next door to seduce you more conveniently. I watched my father realize that Rebecca had probably planned even that detail. She'd specifically asked for money she knew would cause maximum emotional damage when discovered. The district supervisor wants to meet with our family tomorrow, Dad said quietly. All of us. They need to determine if this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern of inappropriate conduct. What kind of determination? I asked. Whether I'm permanently barred from ministry. Whether there are grounds for criminal charges. Whether. His voice trailed off. Whether what? Mom sat down heavily. Whether they recommend removing you from our custody pending investigation. The words hit like a physical blow. What? Churches take youth ministry scandals very seriously, Dad explained, not meeting my eyes. If they determine I've been engaging in inappropriate relationships with young staff members, they might question my judgment regarding other vulnerable people in my care. But I'm your daughter. You're also the minor who exposed this situation, Mom said grimly. They might decide you were being exposed to inappropriate situations at home. Hotel rooms during church conferences, private meetings with Rebecca, access to adult conversations you shouldn't have heard. My stomach dropped to somewhere around my knees. I thought I was protecting my family by exposing Rebecca's manipulation. Instead, I might have given the church ammunition to tear us apart completely. This is insane, I whispered. This is what happens when scandals spiral out of control, Mom replied. Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing when she disappeared. Now we're left holding responsibility for everything while she starts fresh somewhere else. Through the window, I could see Rebecca's empty house mocking us from across the yard. She'd won after all. The district supervisor, Dr. Margaret Hayes, looked like she could stare down the devil himself and win. She sat across from our family in the church conference room, the same room where I'd watched Rebecca manipulate the board just days earlier, with a stack of files that seemed to contain our entire lives reduced to incident reports and witness statements. Let me make sure I understand the timeline, Dr. Hayes said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with pastoral scandals for 30 years. Sister Rebecca Chin began email correspondence with you in July, 8 months before the youth pastor position was even posted. Dad shifted uncomfortably. She was inquiring about ministry opportunities in our region. She was inquiring specifically about opportunities at your church, Pastor David. With you personally. Dr. Hayes consulted her notes. 17 emails over 2 months before she submitted a formal application. Would you characterize this as normal hiring protocol? The question hung in the air like a blade. Mom's jaw tightened, and I could see her adding this to her growing list of Dad's betrayals. I thought she was being thorough in her research, Dad mumbled. Thorough. Dr. Hayes made a note. And during this thorough research period, did Sister Chin inquire about your family situation? Your marriage? Your personal interests outside of ministry? Dad's silence was answer enough. Dr. Hayes turned to me. Young lady, when did you first notice inappropriate interaction between your father and Sister Chin? I glanced at Mom, who nodded encouragingly. Last fall. She started showing up at family dinners, staying late for private conversations with Dad. She was always finding reasons to be at our house. And you documented this behavior? I took screenshots of their text messages. Dad wasn't careful about leaving his phone around. Dr. Hayes' eyebrows rose slightly. You invaded your father's privacy by accessing his personal communications. The shift in her tone made my stomach clench. Suddenly I wasn't the concerned daughter exposing wrongdoing, I was the problem child violating boundaries. I was trying to protect my mom, I said defensively. By spying on private adult conversations. Dr. Hayes wrote something down. Were there other instances where you observed or recorded your father's interactions without his knowledge? I took pictures of them together in Rebecca's yard. From your bedroom window, surveilling adult neighbors. Another note. Did you share this information with anyone else before Sunday's revelation? Just my mom, the night before. Dr. Hayes looked at Mom with what seemed like disappointment. And you decided the appropriate response was to allow your minor daughter to publicly present this material to the entire congregation? Mom's face flushed. I was trying to support her decision to tell the truth. The truth that she'd gathered through invasion of privacy and surveillance. Dr. Hayes closed one file and opened another. I have statements from 14 congregation members expressing concern about the traumatic nature of Sunday's revelation. Several families are considering transferring to other churches due to what they're calling an unsafe environment for children. My heart sank. I thought the congregation would be grateful to know the truth. Instead, they were blaming me for traumatizing them. Furthermore, Dr. Hayes continued, I have reports that you, young lady, have been disruptive in youth group settings, challenging authority figures, and asking inappropriate questions about adult relationships. Rebecca reported that. I asked, my voice cracking. Sister Chin provided extensive documentation of concerning behaviors before her departure. Behaviors that suggest a troubled home environment where boundaries between adult and minor concerns had become inappropriately blurred. The room felt like it was spinning. Rebecca hadn't just stolen our money and manipulated my father, she'd spent months building a case that I was an unstable teenager from a dysfunctional family. What does this mean for us? Mom asked quietly. Dr. Hayes leaned back in her chair. It means we have a very complicated situation. A pastor who exercised poor judgment, a spouse who enabled inappropriate public accusations, and a minor who was exposed to adult situations that clearly affected her emotional development. She opened a third file, and my blood turned to ice when I saw the letterhead, Child Protective Services. We're recommending a full family evaluation. The CPS evaluation lasted 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Social workers interviewed us separately and together, reviewed our home, spoke with teachers and neighbors, and generally turned our lives inside out with clinical precision. I spent hours answering questions about my surveillance behavior and boundary issues while trying to convince strangers that I wasn't some troubled kid acting out, just a daughter who'd watched her family being systematically destroyed. But sometimes the truth has a funny way of surfacing. It started with Mrs. Patterson, of all people. She called Mom on a Thursday morning, her teacher voice sharp with indignation. Sarah, I've been thinking about this whole mess, and something's been bothering me. That Rebecca girl asked me very specific questions about your marriage back in September. Questions about whether you and David seemed happy, whether you argued, what your routines were. Then Mr. Johnson from the bank called. He'd been reviewing the account activity more carefully and noticed something odd. The transfers to Rebecca's account had been made using Dad's login, but from IP addresses traced to the church computer lab. Rebecca had been using Dad's banking information without his knowledge for some of the later withdrawals. The breakthrough came when Jessica's mom, who worked at the phone company, mentioned casually that she'd seen some weird billing patterns on the church account. Someone was making a lot of long-distance calls to Portland last summer, way before Rebecca was hired. Calls to numbers registered under her name. Dr. Hayes came back for a second meeting, this time with a different expression on her face. We've uncovered some additional information, she announced, spreading new documents across the conference table. It appears Sister Chen had been researching not just your family, but the entire congregation's financial and personal information. We found evidence of similar patterns at her previous 3 churches. Dad looked up sharply. 3 churches. Sister Chen has been systematically targeting pastors in vulnerable marriages for the past 6 years. Portland, Sacramento, Denver, and now here. Same pattern, establish correspondence, get hired, identify marital weaknesses, exploit them while gaining access to church resources, then disappear when things get complicated. Mom let out a shaky breath. So she was never pregnant. Medical records from her previous location suggest Sister Chen has been claiming pregnancy strategically for years. It's her exit strategy when situations become untenable. I felt vindicated and sick at the same time. What about the CPS investigation? Dr. Hayes actually smiled slightly. The evaluation found a family dealing with extraordinary circumstances in a reasonable way. Your behavior, while unconventional, was consistent with a protective daughter responding to genuine threats to family stability. She turned to Dad. Pastor David, while your judgment was clearly compromised, the evidence suggests you were the victim of a sophisticated manipulation campaign rather than the instigator of inappropriate conduct. The relief was overwhelming, but Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. Sister Chen made one critical error. She kept detailed records of her projects on a laptop that was recovered from her Portland apartment when police executed a search warrant. She documented her entire strategy for targeting your family, including psychological profiles of each family member and step-by-step plans for isolating your father. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. So what happens now? Now you rebuild, Dr. Hayes said simply. The criminal charges against Sister Chen are being handled by federal authorities since this crosses state lines. Your family has been through trauma, but you've also demonstrated remarkable resilience. She packed up her files and looked at each of us directly. You survived someone whose full-time job was destroying families. That says something about the strength you have together. After she left, we sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Dad spoke. I owe you both an enormous apology. And I owe you, he looked at me, a debt I can never repay. You saved our family. Mom nodded slowly. We have a lot of work to do. Marriage counseling, rebuilding trust, finding new jobs and a new home. But we're doing it together. I asked. They looked at each other, then at me. Together, Mom confirmed. Through the window, Rebecca's empty house stood as a reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. But we were still here, still fighting, still family. Sometimes the truth really does set you free.